Hello, welcome to Revenant Reads. I'm Ben, and this is another edition of Fresh Red Kills. So, Fresh Red Kills is where I talk about the books that I have recently finished reading, and recently is kind of a stretch. I am now halfway into June, and I am going to be talking about books that I read in May. It has been a very busy month and a half, but I finally got some time on my hands and I am making some videos. So bear in mind, as I talk about these books, it's been over a month since I've read both of these, so might be a little bit rusty. If you're new to my channel, I don't call my videos reviews. These are more just discussions. I'm not formally reviewing these books. I am sharing my thoughts on them. So expect something that is very informal and unscripted. The unscripted part should become very obvious to you very quickly. So I'm going to be talking about the Poetic Edda, also sometimes called the Elder Eddas, and this is the edition translated by Jackson Crawford. And I will very briefly talk about this, A Modern Guide to Heathenry, which both of these I read for Maybe Midrash, which is a yearly booktube event where people read books that deal seriously with religion. And in this case, I decided to focus on heathenism. And I'll be making a video after this where I did read a book about Christianity as well. But let's talk about this one first. Now, I have been a very long time, I guess you could say, enthusiast of Old Norse culture. It's something that the mythology, the aesthetics, a lot of their worldview has always really resonated with me. And I wanted to dive deeper and deeper into essentially their religious worldview. Now, when it comes to our knowledge about what we would today call Norse mythology, a lot of it comes from this. Now, this is a collection of, I guess, manuscripts that were written down in the 13th century, but they deal with things that happened hundreds of years before, essentially pagan beliefs. So reading this sort of thing, you have to understand that you are reading something about paganism through a Christian lens. Now, sometimes that's true for all the sagas, all the Icelandic sagas. And sometimes that can be more obvious than others. The way that things are written, the kind of Christian intrusion. However, a lot about this does feel like it has preserved the pagan past. We have things about Odin and the gods in here, and stories about old kind of pagan heroes. But there are a lot of clues in here that make us think that a lot of this has probably come down to us fairly well preserved. For instance, they talk about burning a woman as a corpse, basically as a funeral rite, which the Christians had long stopped doing by the time this sort of thing was written down. So it's clues like that, I think, that we can be relatively sure that what we are reading, it has been obviously altered some, but has been pretty well preserved. Excuse me, cough there. That's one of the other reasons I haven't made a video in a while. When I did actually have some time earlier in the month, I got sick and I had coughing fits. So I wouldn't be able to sit down in front of a camera and do a video because I would cough uncontrollably. That's mostly gone away, except for every so often I get a little bit of a cough. Now, the things that are in here, again, this is Jackson Crawford. He's a pretty prolific YouTuber as well. And I read his translation before this of the Volsunga saga, and he also had the saga of Ragnar Lothbrok in there as well. And I'd also already read his translation of the Havamal, which is also in here. That's the Words of the Wise One, or Words of Odin. The first half of these manuscripts, and all of them do have a very fragmentary feel. You're reading like portions of things, but you don't always have the context in which they existed originally. This is just what happened to be, either written down and then also written down and preserved. We have the first half here dealing with mostly the gods, the second half dealing with heroes. And there's some really good stuff in here. Some that really, I never read the Voluspa before. That's the first thing in here. That's essentially the god Odin bringing, resurrecting or raising to undead status a witch, like a seeress, and asking her prophecy. And this is where we get the story of Ragnarok from. This is where Odin finds out what happens, the fate of the gods. After that, in here you have the Havamal. Again, it was he calls this the Council of Odin the One-Eyed. Odin had given his eye for wisdom. Some other great ones in here, the Grimness Mall, and then the poems that are in here. We have things about Helgi, Sigurd, which that's one of the interesting things. I'm really glad that I read the Saga of the Volsungs, or Volsunga Saga first, because that is a very obviously influential, very epic type of saga, but it's very swift. You get the feeling more like you're reading a summary of a story, and that there's a larger story that people were probably aware of at the time that just hasn't been passed down to us. This is just what happened to get preserved. So there's a lot of gold in there, but it's very unpolished. And in here, we get various scenes from the Volsunga saga, but they're slightly different than the version that's complete that has been passed down to us. So we know that there were all kinds of alternative stories going on about this family, the Volsungs, that probably differed by region, by time period, So you really are realizing that you're basically just scraping the top of the iceberg when you read these things. Now, if you're somebody who's really interested in Norse mythology, and I don't just mean like in a passing way, I mean, if you really want to get into this stuff, you have to read the Eddas. And I thought that Crawford did a very good job here. So would I recommend it? In that case, I definitely would, under those circumstances. I think that people who come into this blind, not knowing what they're getting into, are going to be kind of confused and not really sure what they're reading. So related to that, I have had a fascination, and this has been kind of an aloof sort of fascination with heathenry, or modern Norse paganism. For a long time, I've been watching YouTube channels and gathering just sort of information. There are parts of it that I find very, very attractive. Now, just to be upfront, I am an atheist. I don't believe in one God, let alone many. My nature is incredibly secular, but I find that, not that I'm not uncomfortable with my life, but I do find that I've grown a greater appreciation over time for things like ritual. And for ritual, and especially if you add like maybe a poetic, mythological aspect to it, that those sorts of things can enrich life. And they can also help to mark the calendar better. So there are certain things that I wish that I did better. I wish that I had marked the seasons better. I wish that I spent more time talking about, ancestors, and even like talking, to my kids about their great grandparents more. And heathenry, or at least Norse paganism. Now, I say that as though it's one thing. It's not really one thing. If you just start watching YouTube channels of practicers, you will find that there is huge variation and often a lot of disagreement among them. So this is not one unified thing. So I was curious to see the way different people approached it. Now, it seems like there are two kind of avenues that you can really approach it from. One of them is very polytheist, and that comes from a place of belief in the gods. Another way that you can approach it, which might entail belief in the gods, but it doesn't exactly have to, is through animism. The maybe most ancient of religions, but essentially seeing the world and everything basically being imbued with spirit. You can either believe that in a literal spirit, or you can just kind of personify nature, but you can kind of attack heathenism or Norse paganism through that lens as well, in which case the gods aren't always all that important, and you don't have to necessarily be a believer. That's the avenue that I have found, over the past year and a half or so, that I've discovered, and that I find actually quite attractive. Would I call myself a Norse, heathen or Norse pagan at this point? No, I would not. I am still an atheist, but I've definitely been playing with the idea of ritual. And that's kind of what I approach this book with. I wanted to see the way different people practice things, and I wanted to find out more, especially about ritual, about attitudes, about perspective. Last year, my family and I went to Salem, which is fun, and of course that's filled with witch shops and pagan shops, and inside a Norse pagan shop, I found this book on the shelf, so I picked it up. The guy was actually just stocking it, putting a bunch of it on the shelves, and I thought, you know what, I think this cover looks pretty cool, I'll give it a try. And then for maybe mid-rash, I finally sat down and read it. And I'm not going to talk about this book in a way in which I am reviewing it, because essentially, in part, this book is not for me. This is definitely for polytheists. This is for people who have a belief in the gods as real deities. Galina Krasskova, hopefully I'm saying that name right, she basically defines heathenry as first and foremost honoring the gods, which, as I said, maybe heathens or Norse pagans who are of the more animist variety don't necessarily prioritize that sort of thing. They might look at things more like the land spirits or the whites or other aspects like nature and ritual. But this is a very polytheist way to look. Most of this deals with the gods. And to the point where, as an outsider, I didn't always understand what she was talking about. She talks about how you can be surprised the way certain gods will appear to you, or goddesses. And at one point she talks about how a goddess appeared to her as a playful little girl. And I didn't know how to take that as a reader. I don't know if she means, did she literally see a little girl? Was this a vision? Did she see a little girl who she thought was maybe the goddess? There's a lot of different things that you can imagine that being. But again, as somebody who is a non-believer, and I didn't know what to do with that sort of information. Now, if you are somebody who is interested in a very polytheist view of heathenry, this is probably a pretty good source for you. There were things that I liked in here. And I'm really just going to be talking about, again, not whether or not the book was good or not, but what resonated with me. So as I said earlier, these are not book reviews. These are my thoughts on books. So she has a chapter on the cosmology, where she talks about the, I guess you could say, origin story of the universe from the Norse perspective. And she does a pretty nice job, I think, of kind of teasing out maybe the poetry of it. I like that quite a bit. She does go into things like the soul matrix. The Norse did not believe in a single soul. Their souls had parts to it, which I find incredibly fascinating. And she goes into that sort of thing, and I like that. She talks about rituals like the symbol, which I am really fascinated with, and I think I just might give a try at some point, because I think whether you're a believer or not, I just think that it's a beautiful ritual to get people talking and connecting. And you can look at that stuff on your own. I'm not going to go into it all right here. But that aside, there's certainly many times when I wasn't necessarily connecting with what she said or her perspective. Now, I am going to seek out just some other books just to try and get a variety of perspectives. But as I said, the thing that attracts me most is more of an animist perspective. I think that is something that might fit much better with me and would really require no belief or faith. I can very easily interact with, for instance, the nature around me in a way which kind of personifies it. And if I kind of pretend that it has a conscience, like a tree, even if I don't deep down believe it, it might actually change the way that I interact with it and maybe give more respect. Anyhow, it's a way to train your brain to think a certain way, which I think is a very fascinating topic. So again, that's all stuff for the future. That's stuff for maybe future videos when I figure my stuff out. At this point, I still consider myself very much an atheist, and that's not going to change. But I said my perspective on ritual has been evolving. So I guess stay tuned to where that goes. So once again, the books that I read were the Poetic Edda and the Modern Guide to Heathenry. The subtitle is Lore, Celebration, and Mystery of the Northern Traditions. So yeah, if you have any thoughts on these, love to hear your thoughts. Be kind. Whenever you get into religion, and I've seen a lot of angry heathens online. So yeah, if you have helpful information that you would like to pass on, I would certainly love to hear it. As always, thank you, BookTube.